The second generation of Pokémon is infamous for introducing new monsters that are outright awful or badly placed throughout the Johto and Kanto region. I'm here to look for the ones that are absolutely not worth using in their debut games: Gold, Silver and Crystal. I will judge each Pokémon based on the following criteria: availability, in-game role, move pool, niches in-game, version exclusivity and battle efficiency. With that out of the way, I quickly want to preface that Pokémon games are very easy. Nearly every Pokémon can be viable, but when I play these games casually, I like to play with a decently built team that can efficiently beat the game. This video is made for players who enjoy playing in a similar way. Now it's finally time to get into which Generation 2 Pokémon should not be used in a GSC playthrough. The first group of Pokémon I want to talk about are the new grass types. It's common knowledge that Johto is very unfriendly towards grass types. They just cannot contribute very well against any of the gym leaders, Team Rocket grunts and rival fights. I won't just leave it at that. Let's take a closer look at just how disappointing each new grass type in Gen 2 really is. The Johto games start in New Bark Town, where we find Chikorita. As a starter, Meganium has a high base stat total. There's nothing lacking in that field. Move pool wise, Meganium shines in its supporting capabilities with screen and powder moves. It's the only grass type that gets Razor Leaf at a very early level, which is one of the better damage dealing grass type moves in the game. Compared to other types, this is kind of pathetic though. If you want to run a full-on offensive set, Meganium can also learn Return and Earthquake, but I personally don't recommend doing that.